I was speaking in Austin and I was on a panel with 4 other type 1 diabetics. We all sort of have different ways that we manage our diabetes. And it was called a powerhouse panel because we all had very low A1Cs. And so there was myself, who's 100% plant-based, and I've been for years. There was a guy who's like plant curious. So he's kind of working it in more so. And there was 2 guys that were straight keto and animal protein, animal fats, higher fat diet. We were sitting there and we're all sort of introducing ourselves about like what we do, what our A1C is. And, they started talking about what they eat. I, being the last person to speak, I was like, yeah, I'm Matt. I'm vegan. I'm kind of a unicorn in the diabetic community because plant-based diabetic don't really go together. And I eat about 500 to 700 grams of carbs a day. And I take, maybe 40 units of insulin, and everybody's jaw dropped. I got diagnosed in fall of 2000. Basically, nobody in my family has type 1. Like, I didn't even hear about it. It all started, I was in high school playing football. We were in summer camps. We were doing 3-a-days. And I just got extremely tired, very thirsty. And there was actually mono going around our football camp. So I was like, that's easy. I probably have mono. So I went in and got tested. And it came back negative. And so it's one of those things where it's like, maybe I was just tired. A month later, I went from being first string to like playing like third string. So we went back to the doctors and got tested in August. So this is sort of after summer camp. The doctor tested me again for mono. It came back negative. He kind of told me, he's like, well, we're just going to do this test. And I don't think it's, going to yield anything, but we'll do it anyway. And it was a urine test, and it came back just off the charts. And then they tested my blood sugar, and it wasn't as bad as I've heard. So I was in like the 300s, but basically at that point forward, you have diabetes. And so that's sort of where it started at, was just kind of thinking I had something else, and then just completely changed. I come from sort of like an more active family from like weightlifting and bodybuilding and sort of like football. Like we were all linemen, so kind of bigger, beefier people. My brother kind of got me into sports from like football sense. We played pickup hockey and stuff, but always been active. Started weightlifting when I was like 14 years old. And that was primarily my main source of working out up until recently. I feel weird always talking about that because it's not your traditional, like, I've seen the light sort of moment. So what happened, my daughter is going to be 5. When she was born, I was doing weightlifting, like bodybuilding type work. I was really focused on that, like kind of gaining mass and all that sort of stuff. And after she was born, I had gained a ton of weight. And it was all like fat, right? I was almost 300 pounds. I was like, I feel terrible. I'm overweight and just miserable, depressed. And so what happened was my wife, who's a fitness instructor and kind of in that fitness world, actually found like an online coach who's not plant-based or anything like that. But realistically, I joined his sort of coaching, and I had lost 100 pounds from working with him. And he was, like I said, he wasn't plant-based. I wasn't on a plant-based diet, but what that sort of taught me was what is in food, because it was if it fits your macros. So I weighed everything out with the scale, which helped my insulin management and diabetes because I was actually weighing out carbs. I knew exact numbers. And it sort of taught me the importance of that. But as I went through that process, I just noticed I was eating more and more vegetables and more plant-based, because when you do that sort of like weight loss, like you want to eat all the food, but you're so limited in these windows. So when I first did it, I was eating more like the eggs and, bacon and stuff like that. And by the end of it, I was having primarily like salads and greens. Through that process of losing the weight, one of my coworkers came to me and said, hey, Matt, like, you ever heard of plant-based eating? Like, I know you're diabetic, but have you ever heard of that? And, association with diabetes management. I was like, I have no idea. So he initially had showed me a few nutritionfacts.org videos on the association between a higher fat diet and, basically diabetic complications. I had no clue about that, because he actually asked me, he's like, what causes diabetes? And I was like, well, you mean type 2? And he's like, well, type 1 too. Like, do you have any idea? And so I was like, no, I had no idea the mechanism behind what was going on. And after educating myself on those videos, I was like, that makes a lot of sense. And like, I come from a science background. I'm a geochemist. So it's like, that really struck a chord with me, is seeing the link from mechanism to symptoms and how that all interplays. From there, around that time, I ended my coaching with the nutrition coach. And so I told my wife, I was like, why don't we just try plant-based for like a month just to see what happens, just to see if I can see any benefit with my diabetes, which at that time it was fairly well controlled because I was actually eating a lower fat diet during that period as well, but I was eating very high protein. When we did that sort of like month trial, we actually went to Oklahoma because I live in Texas for just sort of like we went to a cabin and just went away as a family. And before that, we went to a open pit barbecue place, which is obviously all animal, high fat. And I just engorged myself like I normally do. And I noticed that entire weekend, I could not get my glucose to come down. 200s, and I pumped all of the insulin I could. It just would never come down. And I was like, what is going on? And it's funny. So the next week we started the plant-based diet, and it just was boom, right back where it needed to be. And thinking back to those nutritionfacts.org videos, I was like, that's exactly what happened to me. Like I am a case study for high animal fat, high protein diet and how it immediately affects your diabetes. So at that point, I was really intrigued. Once we were plant-based for that sort of first week, I went on Netflix and I just consumed all the information I could from documentaries. So when I would be running on the treadmill or doing the Stairmaster, just watching that. So from then on, I was like, I can't do it. And it just so happens that I've gained excellent blood glucose control, and it's great for diabetes, but also there's that ethical side too. So that was about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago now. So that's sort of how we stumbled upon it. And through that time, like I actually found Robbie and Cyrus on Mastering Diabetes, and watching their posts and listening to them talk on podcasts, I was like, that's exactly what I'm experiencing. So it was kind of funny. We all three of us kind of came to the same conclusion, but different avenues. It wasn't necessarily inspired by them, but I guess we took the same avenues. I am no different than anybody else. Like I was extremely overweight. I was one of those guys that ate animal protein because I was worried about like my strength and stuff like that. And, you know, I had lost weight, not on a plant-based diet, but like for me, it's really telling is that I've kept the weight off. Like that doesn't happen oftentimes. And I eat anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 calories a day almost. And like my carb count as a diabetic is anywhere from like 500 to 700. It's for me, and I found great athletic performance too. So it's definitely not confined to, you know, special people. It's anybody can feel these effects. I never really thought about carb to insulin ratio. And it's funny because I've gotten more involved with the diabetic community as far as like going to conferences and stuff. I actually spoke in Austin this past winter. And it was weird being there because I'd never been around so many diabetics that like understood things. And so there's just things that I just I'm one of those people that just rolls with the punches. I get the diagnosis. Okay, what do I need to do? But as far as the insulin to carb ratio, I never calculated it before really being plant-based. I only started paying attention to that since actually reading Mastering Diabetes. But knowing, because I was weighing out all of my food during that year period of nutrition coaching, I know exactly how many grams of carbohydrates and fat and protein I was eating. I also know how much insulin I was taking too, obviously. So I was eating on that diet 125 grams of carbohydrates a day, for the last 3 months of it. And I was taking about 35 units a day, like total units. And then I noticed whenever we switched to the plant-based diet, like I had carb phobia. This I think most diabetics do, but I slowly ramped it up. And, you know, nowadays I eat between, like I said, 500 and 700 plus grams of carbohydrates a day. And like rarely do I ever go over like 40 to 45 units a day, dependent upon what I eat and the fat content and sort of the athletic activity. Thinking to myself, I'm eating almost, 4 to 6 times as many carbohydrates. And I'm maybe taking, a tenth more of the insulin than I normally do. It's just outrageous. I was speaking in Austin and I was on a panel with 4 other type 1 diabetics. We all sort of have different ways that we manage our diabetes. And it was called a powerhouse panel because we all had very low A1Cs. And so there was myself, who's 100% plant-based, and I've been for years. There was a guy who's like plant curious. So he's kind of working it in more so. And there was 2 guys that were straight keto and animal protein, animal fats, higher fat diet. We were sitting there and we're all sort of introducing ourselves about like what we what we do, what our A1C is. And, they started talking about what they eat. I, being the last person to speak, I was like, yeah, I'm vegan. I'm kind of a unicorn in the diabetic community because plant-based diabetic don't really go together. And I eat about 500 to 700 grams of carbs a day. And I take, maybe 40 units of insulin, and everybody's jaw dropped. It was so funny. And the guy looked at me that was sitting next to me, and he goes, I don't even eat that in a month. And it's just, yeah, I mean, it's, the proof's in the pudding. Before I lost all that weight, my A1C was approaching 7. So it was like, I think it was like 6.9 or 7.2. And then once I began losing the weight, just from the metabolic effects of losing weight and, just the insulin requirements, as I got down and sort of like I got to the stable weight that I'm at now, my A1C was about 5.5. Oddly enough, once we went plant-based, it actually went down to like most recently, it was 4.5. I do go low during some exercise, and then, I'll take a goo, and this is like, I'm running, 14 miles. Like, that's going to happen. You burn through the glycogen. My A1C, since we've been plant-based, has honestly been at or below 5 the entire time. Oddly enough, once again, my doctor's like, what are you doing? Like, no idea. And I actually referenced him to Cyrus and Robbie. He was like, you need to look these guys up, because they explain it in, I think a very mechanistic manner and everything, and of how you can reduce your A1C and sort of the implications of that. He is completely blown away. He's sometimes just like, I don't even want to check your A1C. Just makes him angry. He doesn't get it. And I think a lot of that sort of like remorse too, like, how is the patient telling me how to do things, right? So